Okay, let me get back here to where I was at because I just lost my page. Here we are. Okay, I got a method to my madness up here and all the stuff that we got going on. Okay, so as we get into the Torah portion or the Haftarah today, we're going to see that there was a rebuke to the nation, specifically to the 10 northern tribes who were assimilated into Assyria. Okay, now, but we also know from the Haftarah as well that all of those that were lost in the Assyrian captivity will return. So as we get into this, so the Haftarah for the portion of Shemot has one theme divided into three parts. We're going to talk a little about the general theme is the blossoming of redemption, bringing redemption to the whole world. And how is that accomplished? And that's a good question because it starts with you and I, what we do, how we change our lives, how we conduct our lives in this world. Okay, that's what's going to bring the redemption. So first of all, we go down into exile for a reason. Okay, so there is a reason for the exile. But secondly, in the darkness of the exile, it's where we're going to accomplish the most. Okay, and what I mean by that is it's developing ourselves and the world. Okay, it's not just about ourselves, but developing ourselves and the world to bring about what? The redemption of the whole world for the redemption. So thirdly, the gathering of the exiles is described and how when Mashiach comes, we will reap the fruits of our labor that we are currently working for. Okay, so what are we doing? How are we cultivating our lives today and throughout our weeks to bring forth fruit, okay, in this world? So there are also hints on how to bring Mashiach, okay, through showing love, okay, the love of Hashem to all those around us. And so that's part of that. So the connection to our Torah portion is that Shemot begins with, if you remember, the descent of the Hebrew people into Egypt. Then it tells of the hard labor and the amazing growth of the Hebrew nation. Then finally comes the beginning of our redemption from Egypt when God sent Moses to start the process of the Exodus. So another connection in the first verse of the Haftarah. Okay, we read that. It says the Parsha begins, and these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. The Haftarah also begins, those who came, whom Jacob caused to take root. Israel budded and blossomed, and they filled the face of the earth with fruit. Says the Parsha also tells us how the Hebrew people began to multiply. Remember that? So both Jacob and Israel, and I find this interesting. This is what we're going to talk a little bit about. Both Jacob and Israel are the names of the Hebrew people. When it comes to taking root, it says Jacob, but by budding and blossoming, bringing forth fruit, it says Israel. Okay, and so that is what we're striving for. Okay, in this walk. So Jacob refers to the Hebrew nation when they interact with the physical world, which in the time of the exile is a very dark place. And many times we find this world a very dark place. So how do we interact with it, though? That's the question. Okay, it is symbolic of serving God and following His will, which is our main modus service in the exile. Okay, it is compared to planting. Okay, if you guys have ever planted gardens or trees, it takes time for those things to bud and to take root and to bring forth fruit. Okay, it is a lot of work. But even when the fruit comes, it's a lot of work, what? To keep the weeds out. Okay, so it is hard work, it's thankless work. Okay, the plants don't thank you for taking care of them. Okay, it's something you have to do. So it's the same thing in our own life. You don't get thanks from your neighbor necessarily for working on you, except when you treat them kindly, and then they may thank you. So yes, when we are cultivating our lives, working on the character flaws that we may have, and unfortunately there's a lot of character flaws in your life and my life that we can't see. Have you guys ever been like this? That guy really has a problem, and you point at somebody. And unbeknownst to you that you may have a problem too. So that's really the key thing to each one of our lives, is to understand that we all have issues and character flaws that we have to work through. And so that's part of that cultivating, the thankless work. It's the part of the planting the seeds, metaphorically, okay, in the dark, in the exile. But it's there where the seed, it takes root and it grows into a great tree. And the transformation from a small seed to a large tree is it's actually very great. Okay, so Israel. Now let's talk a little bit about the name Israel here. Israel refers to the Jewish people's interaction with the spiritual and the godly. Okay, it is symbolic of serving God out of deep appreciation and understanding. And I like that because serving God is not only about deep appreciation, but it brings understanding. Okay, understanding in why we do what we do. Now, I was just reading this week, and I found it amazing. As I was finishing this up, I was reading this earlier in the week, and I was like, wow, what a good connection here. I was actually reading from the book of Mishlei, Proverbs, chapter 4. And it says, do not take the Torah, or do not forsake the Torah, and it will protect you. Love it, and it will safeguard you. The beginning of wisdom is to acquire understanding. Okay, from your every acquisition, acquire understanding. Okay, search for it, and it will uplift you. Okay, it will honor you when you embrace it. It will set an ornament of grace upon your head, and it will bestow a crown of splendor upon you. So, just briefly here, it's talking about the initial stage of wisdom is to learn from others and to study with a teacher, right? And, because a lot of times if we're not learning from somebody that knows what they're doing, the things that you can do or the things that you start doing may be wrong, or you may be not necessarily achieving the correct way of getting it done. So with that being said, it says the initial stage of wisdom is to learn with a teacher. But then it says, I thought that was amazing, it says once a person has absorbed the wisdom from his teachers, he should use his own deductive powers to derive the reasons for what he has learned and seek out the new applications of his wisdom. According to Rashi, it says according to IBN Nachmiash, it says this verse provides us with the proper sequence to follow in the Torah, the study of Torah. First, one must accumulate the knowledge of Torah. Only afterwards can he delve into understanding the reasons behind it. Rabbi Bachya renders the verse, and with all your possessions acquire understanding. First and foremost, you must acquire wisdom. But this acquisition, notice what he says. He says this acquisition of wisdom is incomplete without the acquiring of the understanding. So therefore, a person must use all of his possessions, if necessary, in order to acquire understanding, for that is true wealth. It says the wisdom of Torah is based solely on what was received from God himself. One must accept the principles taught by God as its basis. So I found it as it continues on, and I'll finish this little paragraph. It says, thus the beginning of wisdom is only wisdom itself. Okay? There is no other source of wisdom, only the principles of the Torah. Binah, however, is attained through logical and inductive processes based on previously acquired Torah wisdom and general knowledge. Therefore, the verse continues, in all the fields of knowledge you have already acquired, use your inductive process to attain understanding. So, as the name Israel, as I had just mentioned here, it says, once again, I'll remind you, it is symbolic of serving God out of deep appreciation, but also understanding. And then it says it is compared to the budding and the blossoming and the growth of fruit. We bring forth fruit. Okay, these are concepts that we're familiar with. Okay, but how does it bring forth fruit? Okay, honest business dealings, being honest in your practices. If your neighbor's cow is out, go catch the cow. Go tell your neighbor. And these are all things that stem out of Torah principles. So then it says above the ground in the light and warmth, the budding and the blossoming is visible and beautiful, and the fruit is tasty and enjoyable. And I think that's the key that Hashem desires for each one of us in the exile is that the fruit that we bear would be what? Tasty and enjoyable. Okay? In the light of the revelation of God, this will bring about the era of Mashiach. So, and this will be possible only because of the seeds we planted and allowed to flourish in the exile. So our work as Jacob in the darkness is what gives us the great pleasure in bearing fruit as Israel. Okay? So I also want to talk a little bit about, later on in the Haftarah, it talks about the ingathering. Okay, so the Haftarah continues with a rebuke. Now, I find this amazing because we didn't read it. You guys can go back, but you'll see it constantly throughout the prophets, that you will see there is a rebuke for foreign worship, idol worship, okay, to the Jewish nation. And then it resumes telling about the time of Mashiach. It will be on that day that God will beat the kernel from the chaff, from the river until the brook of Egypt. And you, the children of Israel, will be gathered one by one. And it will be on that day the great shofar will be sounded, and those who are lost in Assyria and those that are cast away in Egypt will come and bow down to God on the holy mountain in Jerusalem. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the difference between Egypt, okay, the exile of Egypt, as opposed to the exile of Assyria. Okay, God will He will remove the kernel. Okay, all those that are following Him. Okay, and the Jewish people from the chaff. Okay, the nations of the world. So it talks about the river refers to Assyria, which was on the Euphrates. What is this? What is the significance of Egypt and Assyria? Okay, and why are the exiles in Egypt called cast away, whereas those in Assyria are called lost? Okay, that's a good question, right? So there are two types of exiles. So Egypt is symbolic of every exile of oppression and servitude. And a lot of times in oppression and servitude, you seek your way out. Okay? And as Moreh was mentioning earlier, that many times the suffering that we face in our exiles will actually cause us to seek for Hashem. So yeah, there are good things for suffering in our life in this exile because it causes us to seek for Him. But when everything goes great, sometimes we don't seek for Him. Actually, a lot of times, many times we don't. And so that's the difference between Mitsrayim, which means the constraint, okay, servitude, which the Hebrew nation were in when the Hebrew nation was in the Egyptian exile, they were in forced servitude. That is why they were called cast away. Now, the second kind of exile is that of Assyria, which is an exile of abundance and freedom. Okay, I think many of us understand that a little bit, living in the United States, as opposed to other countries. And, it is a good place to live. It really is. But it does make it a little bit hard to get past this idea of abundance and freedom, because it doesn't necessarily cause us to look to Hashem. It causes us to look to the almighty dollar or to the almighty American way to make it through life. Okay, so with that being said, it says the name Assyria in Hebrew comes from the word Ashur, which means happy. Okay, means happy. So when the Israelite people were exiled to Assyria, they had religious and economic freedom. And when there is abundance and freedom, what do we know? It is easy to what? Get lost. And to actually stray from the Jewish faith. Okay? Stray from Hashem. This is why the exiles in Assyria, and this is why the Haftarah comes out and says, come out of idolatry. Come out from the gods of the nations around you. Okay, so that's what he's really bringing about. And Baruch Hashem, he's doing that work in many people's lives. He's helped many of us to come out of a lot of that idolatrous practices that we have previously been in. So then it says, the verse says, and you, the children of Israel, will be gathered one by one. Literally in the Hebrew, it says, to the one. So when it says, you will be gathered to the one. Now I'm going to explain this, okay? I see questions popping out of the tops of your heads, like in the cartoon characters, What does this mean? Okay, first, that every child of Hashem will be gathered. Okay, second, that God Himself will be involved personally with taking every individual one of us. So Rashi explains that he will take each of us by the hand. Third, the one, the essence of every person that allows the spark of Hashem to flourish inside of them, will be gathered and become united with what? The one, which is who? Hashem. Okay? So remember, he says, my name is one. Okay? So that's what he's saying. He says, that when we'll be gathered one by one, literally, to the one, all those that are lost will be gathered to the one, Hashem. So on a second note, okay, it is called to each of us to reach out to others with love and bring them closer to God. Remember the example of Abraham? Okay, Abraham did the same thing with where he was at in his world. What did it say? He brought 70 souls with him. Okay, out of Haran. Canaan. Well, no, not Canaan. Ur. Was it Ur or was it Haran? It was Haran. Okay, so he came out of Ur originally with his father and his brother-in-law. But then when he came out of Haran, he brought 70 souls. Okay, so the call of the great shofar. Okay, what is the significance of the great shofar that will be sounded? Okay, the sound of the shofar reaches the core of every human being. The question is, how powerful is its effect? Okay, we can talk a little bit about the different shofars, but I want to mainly talk about this one. This one is talking about the sounding of the shofar when the Mashiach comes will be even greater than all the previous three, the giving at Mount Sinai, at Rosh Hashanah, and at the Jubilee year. And it says here, it will be so strong that it will reach every human being, even those who are lost in Assyria or cast away in Egypt. It will affect them to the point that they will come and they will bow down to God. And the question is, at what level? Okay, the verse continues, on the holy mountain in Jerusalem, meaning the holiest level. They will come to Jerusalem. What does the prophet speak of in Isaiah? It says they will come up to Jerusalem in the end days. All nations will. And the nation that does not, what? Won't receive rain. So, lastly here, I wanted to bring about this idea. The last two verses, okay, we read the last two verses. It says, so says God to the house of Jacob, who redeemed Abraham. Okay, and this is really where I'm going to conclude it here, and bringing, for purpose for each one of us as we go through our weeks, as we interact with the world around us. Okay, talking about the house of Jacob, who redeemed Abraham. Okay, it says the simple meaning here is that God, who saved Abraham, is speaking to the house of Jacob. Okay, and it says, however, it could be read as if Jacob is the one who redeemed Abraham. Now, what is this supposed to mean? Because obviously we know that Jacob didn't redeem Abraham because Jacob lived after Abraham. But what does this mean? What is he trying to accomplish and say by this? So what are we meant to learn? And what does it have to do with Mashiach? It says Abraham's attribute is love. Okay, if you remember. Remember after the Brit Milah, he was out there, he was waiting for someone to come by that he could bring into his house and say, hey, have a meal. I'm going to cook a meal for you. Very hospitable. He had love for others that would come by. So we are obligated to love every person irrespective of their observance level. Now, interestingly enough, it says, he's talking about, you'll find in some writings is when a friend that you know sins and continues to do so, that you're supposed to hate him. But, okay, this is where the but comes in. Okay, this is where Jacob's attribute of compassion redeems Abraham. Okay, when you see somebody not doing what they're supposed to be doing, you may hate what they do, but don't hate them as a person. This is where the attribute of compassion and love of Abraham comes. So when you see the world failing, you may hate the bad that is there, but at the same time, you will recognize that the person has good deep within. Because what? Why? Because they are created in the image of Hashem, all of us. And the light of the Jewish nation brings the nations back to Hashem. That is the purpose. So in conclusion, it says, you will have compassion on his soul, and this will awaken the love for your friend again. And so as you go through your week, think about your interaction with the world around you. And obviously it starts with you, getting the things worked out in your character flaws, the things that you see that, obviously as Hashem shows you the idolatry in your life, and it could be a lot of different things, but you're actively seeking those things in your life to change so that you can be a better example and a better better picture of who Hashem is in this world. So may you be blessed with that.